What's going on, everybody? Welcome back to the channel. Hope you're all doing well. There's a brand new Scream film that just hit theaters, and that film is called Scream 7. Directed by Kevin Williamson, this film stars people like Neve Campbell, Courteney Cox, Mason Gooding, Jasmin Savoy Brown, Isabel and more. And before we even get into this review, I feel like we have to discuss the elephant in the room, and that is, of course, everything that went down when it comes down to Melissa Barrera and her being fired from this film. Don't worry, if you're over this whole subject matter, we're going to get into the review, which will be the meat and potatoes of this video, but I'm sure some people are going to comment about it, so I feel like I have to say something. Of course, if you guys are not familiar, when this film first went into production, shortly after everything started going down between Israel and Palestine, that entire conflict, Melissa Barrera shared her opinions on that conflict online in support of one side, and it created a discourse leading to her being kicked out of the film altogether. Shortly after, Jenna Ortega, who was also in the previous films playing Melissa Barrera's sister, also chose to not return, not having been fired, but choosing to not return. She said it was for scheduling conflicts, but I think we all know what the actual reason was, leading to this film being what it is that we got today. This film was completely redone, completely rewritten. They brought in Kevin Williamson to direct this time around, who has not directed a film since 1998. And this is the first of the Scream films that he's ever directed, though he is an alumni to this franchise as one of the main writers on multiple installments in the franchise, as well as the main producer, and having starred in a couple of the films as well. So with that said, you know, it goes without saying that all of the behind the scenes nonsense of this film has created a lot of discourse around this film. Some are choosing to boycott the film and not see the film altogether. I still chose to see the film because I wanted to be a part of the discussion and see the film for what we actually got. And I was excited to see Neve Campbell return because there was also all of the stuff last time around with the sixth film that she did not return because of payment issues, that she felt like she was being undercut for what she brings to the franchise. Here she comes back to the front and center position, the main protagonist spot of the Scream franchise. With all that behind us now, let's get into what this film is all about, and then we'll get into my thoughts on the film. When a new Ghostface killer emerges in the quiet town where Sidney Prescott, played by Neve Campbell, has built a new life, her worst fears come true as the mask returns and terror strikes again. This time the threat is deeply personal as Ghostface begins targeting Sidney's family, most notably her daughter and other loved ones, forcing her to confront the horrors of her past and fight to protect those she cares about while uncovering who is behind the mask this time around. And I'll start this off very bluntly by saying that I enjoyed Scream 7, but I also want to make it clear that I do think this is my least favorite in the franchise. And that upsets me to say, it saddens me to say. I think this is unfortunately a film that is riddled with behind the scenes issues that led to the product that we got here. And while there are going to be positives in this review because I did like the film more than I didn't like the film, it is disappointing because I think Scream has been the one slasher franchise that has been incredibly consistent in terms of a franchise that has many sequels. Even some of my favorite franchises in the slasher genre, like the Freddy Krueger films or Jason Voorhees or Michael Myers, Chucky, I love those characters and I love many of the installments that they're a part of. Many of them are nostalgic for me as well. Some of them are just good old, fun films to put on, even if they're not good. But it's undeniable that all of those franchises are riddled with pretty weak installments. And when it comes down to Scream, I think that for the most part, even my least favorite installments in the Scream franchise had still been a fun time or a good film in my personal opinion. And I think this is the first one that kind of rocks the boat, if you will. I don't think Scream 7 is a bad film, but I'd be lying to you if I said that I thought it was a great film, especially after how good I thought Scream, the fifth one, and Scream 6 were. I think that those two films did a great job of being, as they mentioned, re-sequels that were able to play off of the legacy characters and the legacy storylines while introducing new characters, of course, played by Melissa Barrera. You have Jenna Ortega, and of course, the rest of the cast that's a part of those films. And unfortunately, while those stories were really solid, I think what we get here is just another Scream film that unfortunately just doesn't feel as impactful as the previous installments. Let's start with the positives first though, and immediately it's gotta be the cast, most notably the legacy returning cast members, and most notably on top of all that, Sidney Prescott, played once again by Neve Campbell. She's great in this role, and it's great to see her in this role once again. And when she returned to play the role in the 5th Scream film, I think most people were really pleased with the way they utilized her, not really making her the focal point of the film, but allowing her to be a big enough part of the finale of that film that it was satisfying. The last film, as I already mentioned, unfortunately she wasn't in it due to behind the scenes troubles, but here she is once again as the main star, and I think she brings exactly what you want to see out of Sidney Prescott. It's nice to see her in this phase of the story for the character as somebody who's running towards Ghostface and is in no way, shape, or form afraid of the threat, other than the fact that her family and those she loves are in the limelight or in the crosshairs of said threat. You also have Courteney Cox in the film, who I think does a good job here as Gale Weathers, though I will say she is part of the negatives of this film for me, as it doesn't really feel like they knew what to do with her character, but the time spent between Neve Campbell and Courteney Cox I thought was enjoyable, and I think outside of that, it's a competently well-made film. I thought it was well shot, the music is solid, the look, the sound of the film is solid, there's some pretty effective jump scares, mainly because of noise in the film, and there's some pretty solid kills. There's some pretty good gore effects in here, and while a lot of it does lean into CGI gore effects, there are a number of moments in the film that I thought had some pretty good kills and some pretty solid gore effects that I think most gorehounds and slasher fans will be pleased with. And I'll say in terms of pacing, it's a well-paced film. It gets where it needs to go quickly. It's not really a boring film. It keeps things moving, and it kept me engaged. I never found myself bored watching the film. I was consistently engaged to see where it was going to go. I was consistently looking forward to seeing how they were going to develop this story and what the big reveal at the end of the film was going to be. But with all that said, despite my enjoyment of a lot of this film, I did find myself unfortunately pretty disappointed with a lot of the other things in this film. A lot of the supporting characters in this film are pretty one note, and while all of these films have had people who are just fodder to be killed by Ghostface, I think they've always done a good job of getting you into the new crew of characters, or the characters you already knew and love, alongside some new characters, to allow you to actually care for the characters while also beginning to suspect them as possible Ghostface killers. And I think in the case of this film, you have a number of characters that are around Sidney Prescott's daughter in this film who are all the new suspects, but the film really doesn't do much with those characters. They're all very paper thin. There isn't really a lot of expansion on their characters, and it ultimately led to a bunch of very just bland characters in a film where you should actually be trying to figure out who done it. I think this is easily the weakest of the who done it storylines in a Scream film, which did unfortunately let me down. Outside of that as well, in terms of the big reveal at the end, I think this is the kind of film that unfortunately doesn't really have a satisfying reveal. All of these films have had some big reveal where it's actually a lot of times shocking, or at least like you can be like, oh, I knew it, when you see who it turns out to be the Ghostface killer. In the case of this film, I don't necessarily know that you're going to go, I knew it, and maybe you will, but I don't necessarily know that the characters that turn out to be the Ghostface killer are all that shocking, or that you'll even care much. It's one of those things where they really have to spoon feed you why they are the Ghostface killer for it to have any sort of impact, instead of what the other films have done, which is allowing you to see these characters amidst each other throughout the course of it. And while there's always an explanation at the end, there's at least stuff throughout the course of the film where you can be like, oh, and if I on second watch, I can see how that was setting that up. In the case of this film, that just didn't really happen. I thought that the characters that turned out to be the Ghostface killer were just okay. The reveal was a little bit bland to me, ultimately leading to a finale that was gory and action-packed when it comes down to Sidney Prescott and her daughter. But ultimately, in terms of a character level and a big actual shocking whodunit reveal, was just okay. It does sound like I'm more negative on the film than not, but by the time the movie was over, I had fun with it. I wasn't bored watching it. As a fan of slashers, I think there's enjoyment to be had. There are tense sequences in this film, but I didn't care about any of the characters. I wasn't nearly as invested as I was in the last two Scream films or any of the previous Scream films. But you know, with those last two being very recent and having gone to the theaters and been a part of that very communal experience of like, oh no, with the audience, there wasn't a lot of that. at the theater tonight. There were a couple of moments where people cheered when they saw faces from previous films. There were a couple of moments when a character would say a cool one-liner that would get a bit of a cheer, especially if they took out somebody and they kind of survived a moment, you know, maybe get a loud laugh or a quick cheer. But it all kind of felt bland in comparison to what we got with the previous films. And on top of that, if you've seen the marketing for this film, or if you've seen any of the, you know, reveals as to some of the cast members, and I'm going to be kind of vague here, but there was talk about other legacy actors of the franchise returning. And this film, unfortunately, dives into using things like AI and deepfake as a way to manipulate our characters in this whodunit. And it honestly came across kind of cringe to me. I thought that that element of the film was pretty bland and boring and kind of uninspired. And the whole film narratively, now that I've gotten home and had a little time to kind of sit with it, just kind of reeks of, we had to scramble to make a new Scream movie. So we made one. Here's your Scream movie, but it's not nearly as good as the Scream movies we've given you before. The characters are not nearly as developed as the previous films that we've given you. The reveal at the end isn't nearly as impactful as the previous films that we've given you. There's fun moments, there's some good kills, but everything else about the film just feels like a lesser Scream film. There's certainly worse films to watch. I've seen quite a few films in theaters this year already, and I think especially in the horror genre, there's been some real stinkers. And while I don't think this is the best horror film to come out thus far, I do think it's one that's just a little bit more middle of the road. And I think any negativity I have for this is a little bit more disappointment more than anything else. I don't think the film is terrible. There is enjoyment to be had, but it is one of those things where this franchise's kind of legacy has just been so much better, especially with the two recent installments, that I ultimately think that Scream 7 just felt like another Scream, but at the same time, not like any of the other Screams at all. All the other Screams feel like they had heart and soul put into them, especially with the first four being done by Wes Craven and the last two being kind of a love letter to what he had done. This is the first one that just feels like bringing in Kevin Williamson, who hasn't directed a film since 1998, despite the fact that he's been writing for the franchise, may have been a bad choice. I think, you know, not having the same directors from the previous films and not continuing on the story from the previous two films was also a poor choice. And ultimately also you have, you know, characters from the previous films that do appear here, not as far as the legacy old school characters, but also characters played by, you know, Mason Gooding and Jasmin and Savoy Brown. They are the only two returning characters from the previous two that show up here, and they're just completely wasted and underutilized. So yeah, guys, honestly, I'm pretty middle of the road when it comes down to Scream. I left having had more of a good time than not, but I would say I'm teetering right into having a good time instead of me flat out being able to say, I enjoyed it, go watch it. Instead, I would say, if you're a big fan of Scream and you want to see it, I think there's enjoyment to be had. There's Easter eggs and nods and stuff like that that'll likely put a smile on your face and have you be like invested in what's going on. But if you're looking for something on the same level of quality of just even the last two, let alone the entire franchise, I think you're going to be let down. So that's going to be my thoughts on Scream 7. And I want to hear from you guys. Are you planning on checking this out? Are you boycotting the film? Whatever the case may be, leave any and all comments down below. And I'll see you guys in the next one. Bye-bye.